Hi, welcome to Swishing Mindsets. This is Anuradha, and today we have back with us Arundhuti Dasgupta Singhal, a journalist and co-founder of the Mythology Project. She hosts the podcast Epics of the World along with Utkarsh Patel. For a Holi episode, we talk about the mystique of Radha, Krishna's favorite gopi and consort. Hi Arundhati, great to have you back.
Hi, Anuradha. Good to be back with you again. It's a lovely time talking to you always.
Yeah, same here, same here. I was wondering when we could fix up something, and now it's Holi, so we can do this. For me, Holi, I went 2 years ago, like I was just telling you, I went to Vrindavan, and it was
Yeah.
amazing. There were like chants of Radhe Radhe everywhere, and the entire town was playing Holi. So I didn't stick around for the Latmar Holi and all that, but it was just fantastic.
Hmm.
So anyway, so basically, when you say Holi, it's gopis, it's Radha, it's Krishna. So let's start with like, how you see Radha.
Right. Radha, when she comes to you from popular culture, she comes with a lot of kind of packaging. She is, there's a lot of fun involved. There is always this hint of her being teased, people being, there's a little bit of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink a lot of the times. But the thing with Radha is that she's absolutely fascinating in terms of the character that she is, because she doesn't fit into any kind of mold. She is not fit, does not fit into your classical mold. She's not your typical epic heroine in that sense. She's not a wife, typical wife in that sense. She's not a typical goddess either in that sense. So in many ways, she's very different. But despite that, that doesn't take away from her character. She's a kind of a really, she holds her own very much. And I feel that what's happened with Radha is that it's allowed many people to express their love, which is a little different, from the regular way of doing things. So, for one, is that because she doesn't fit into your typical wife, husband, wife mold, the love of Krishna and Radha has encouraged many to approach her as one of their own, which is what we see in the Bhakti poets, which you and I got talking about actually right in the beginning. And for the Bhakti poets, it was such a lovely way to enter into the space where they didn't have to bother about their caste or their class or, whether they fit in or didn't fit in, because Radha didn't fit in. So, see, because she didn't fit into any mold, nobody, her devotees didn't have to fit into a mold. So that she gave you that freedom, to be able to do that. And then the thing is that her divinity, she's why do we Radha is divine, right? We consider her a goddess, even though she is in a relationship with somebody which is not a legalized, acceptable relationship. It is an illicit relationship. It's an extramarital relationship. But because her relationship is with a god, because Krishna is a god, her relationship gets sanctified. And because of him being a god, she became a co-divinity. She becomes another divinity. So, I find those bits really interesting to show how under the Bhakti poets and under that period of time, Radha, who was otherwise, maybe was an interesting, fascinating character, nevertheless, just becomes very, very important. She becomes a divine being.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Bhakti poets. I was going through the anthology Finding Radha, The Quest for Love by Namita Gokhale and Malashri Lal. And
Yeah.
it's mentioned there that maybe with the advent of Jainism and everything, and you'll be able to explain better.
Hmm.
Krishna, of course, he had 16,000, more than 16,000 wives.
Hmm.
But that's not doesn't hold the appeal of
Hmm.
let's say Vishnu and Lakshmi, Shiv and Parvati. So Radha was kind of invented to
Hmm.
give him that softer appeal, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah,
I,
and
I,
yeah,
yeah.
and
I
also
wouldn't go as
yeah,
far
yeah,
as to
yeah.
say invented, because I think some lot of it is based on some idea that existed. See, ultimately we are dealing with a very, very it's a past where we can't really know what really happened. So we kind of clutch at different. How do I put this? There are different kinds of ways in which we look at how to find what is being said by whom and where. And of course, there's archaeology gives us one in, literature gives us another into this entire space. So with Radha and Krishna, what we see is that their story is never not told. It's always told. So although she doesn't find a place in the Mahabharata, that in that sense, even Krishna comes into the Mahabharata pretty late. He doesn't come in right at the beginning. But Radha is otherwise a part of the Krishna mythology right through. From there isn't any time, any point, all the stories she is involved. The entire all his episodes with the gopis, she is involved. Then and the stigma in the relationship, it just doesn't bother the people who are telling stories about them. In fact, there's a story from Bengal which I had read and which is really interesting because it tells you. So I'll tell you the story first and then we'll see what it means. So it's a story from Bengal, and in this it says that Radha was supposed to have been married to a man called Oyon. And apart from the fact that she was in love with Krishna, it was a it was, there was no doubt that she was in love with Krishna, but she was married to this man, and that must have made this a pretty tough marriage. But apart from that, she also had to suffer really difficult in-laws. So she had this, extremely, harassing kind of mother-in-law called Jotil and a sister-in-law called Kutil. Now, Jotil means complex and Kutil means sly and cunning. Okay,
Yeah.
so you get that play with words. So these two constantly would doubt Radha. They would always point out to Oyon that, your wife is not faithful to you. She does this, she does that. But they never managed to catch her because Krishna was always clever enough to make sure that nobody found out.
Yeah, they met in
So
the
one night,
shadows, no? Mostly.
huh?
That was they met in the shadows, no? Yeah.
Yeah, they went in the shadows, exactly.
Yeah.
So one night when Krishna is playing his flute, Radha goes to meet him, and the mother-in-law and the sister-in-law follow. And they tell Ayon that you come with us because we know where she's going. So you have to come with us. And he also follows. So so when she goes to Krishna, Krishna senses that Ayon is somewhere close by. And so he tells Radha, go quickly bring all the flowers that you can find in the forest, put it down and just sit down as if you're worshipping something. So she collects the flowers, puts it down and sits down. And by the time her, entire retinue, mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and husband come, all they see is her praying to the goddess Kali. Krishna transforms himself into Kali. Now, and so that is also why you have the name Krishna Koli. So she's, Krishna is also Kali, basically. So in these stories, you see, so, in all of the things that there's nothing wrong with this relationship because it has divine sanction. The God himself wants this relationship. So there can't be anything wrong with it. And second, it's a fluid relationship because it's not held within the marital framework. It gives you a fluidity in the relationship, and that fluidity also reflects in the gender fluidity that usually songs of Krishna and Radha talk about.
Yeah, and they like changing, taking on each other's roles, wearing each other's clothes. There's a lot of that
Yeah,
also happening. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. They're very comfortable with each other's skin. So she wears his yellow clothes, he wears her clothes. And there's a story that was collected by I think Wendy Doniger, and I'll tell you that story. It's a slightly different. The story goes that there was this goddess called Lalita, I think. Lalita, who had wooed and kind of charmed all the men in heaven. And she now decided that she's going to come to earth and charm the women. So she comes to earth as Krishna and she decides to charm women. But Shiv says that I also want to come down to earth at the same time so that I can experience the charms of Lalita as a male. And so Shiv is reborn as Radha.
Oh, amazing.
Kind of ease with which you can't do this with other divinities because they don't give you this flexibility.
It's very
You know,
playful, right? And it's so playful.
playful. Exactly. That's core of this relationship. It's an extremely playful relationship. And therefore, also you see this whole thing of Ras Leela. The whole idea of Leela, is embedded into this relationship.
Yeah. And also the origins, you've already mentioned her mother-in-law, husband, sister-in-law, and I think there are many poets many versions. Of course, like, as we know her in popular culture, she was a married woman, right? But there are
Right.
many who've even portrayed her single, and
Yeah.
in some cases where the Yashoda, Krishna's mother, has accepted her as the bride, and there are a lot of these tales, right? And
Right, right.
and she came from Barsana.
She came
So
from
that
Barcelona.
was the origin.
Hmm.
And also there's an original temple there that 5,000 years ago it was constructed, right?
Yeah,
And later it was 5,000 years ago it was lost and later reconstructed Radha Rani Mandir.
right,
Yeah,
right.
so that's also the stuff of legend.
Yeah, that also is, so her being a goddess is something that tells us so much about us as a people. It tells you that there were all these social mores and these moral codes that we have inflicted upon ourselves in recent years or in later years are actually quite recent. They are more Victorian in that sense. It didn't bother anybody to make a person like Radha a goddess. And even now, like you remember, you were mentioning how people greet each other as Radhe
Yeah,
Radhe.
yeah,
It's
exactly. There's
it's an
no
abs
mention of even Krishna. It's not required.
Yeah. So there wasn't a problem. And even there was this in this Barsana or Barsana, how do you pronounce it? Bars
Barsana hai, huh?
Barsana. So in Barsana also has the whole tradition of the Latmar Holi, where Radha's because it's Radha's home place, people are the all the men when men who come from Krishna's village, they are beaten down with sticks on the day of the Holi because they are all Krishna has been teasing them way too much, and they all abuses at Krishna and at all the men who come, and it continues even today, till date. So this in the Latmar Holi, in fact, has got a lot of popularity. I mean, it's come into the popular consciousness now, but it's been always there. And what's interesting for me, I find very interesting, is apart from the fact that all of this happens and everything, the practice of beating people or hurling abuses is actually a very aboriginal practice, and it is usually associated with New Year festivals. So when the old year is being pushed out and the new year comes in, you usually have a bonfire, which we have at the Holika Dahan, which is a bonfire. But you also have this, if you go to Goa, for example, they have a festival, I'm forgetting the name, where you have the whole day, there are 3 or 4 days or slightly more days of complete abandon. You hurl abuses at people, you put up plays which are where the jokes are really terrible, and so basically you take everything out of you, basically you detox yourself and you kind of express yourself however you want to express yourself at the end of the year, finish it off, and then begin the new year. And
Like a
it's then
catharsis, no? It's like a catharsis or the modern day roast, what we call it.
absolutely, absolutely same thing, and it's not just here. We have it across the world. So you have it in your in I think in Europe, in several of the European countries. So I think that in the Etruskia and all of those countries also you have a similar practice where end of the year there's a bonfire lit, people will hurl abuses at each other. Sometimes things get really out of hand. But basically, it's a few days and a weeks of revelry and complete abandon. The Latmar Holi is actually something like that. Now, whether that practice, that ancient practice, got mapped into the mythological narrative of Krishna and Radha, we don't know, but it's entirely possible. And but that's the other thing that's so beautiful about this place is, or this whole space is that, nothing is lost, everything is recycled. You may have lost the idea behind that old Aboriginal practice, but it married itself into, say, a newer religious order or a custom or a cultural order, and it continues to live on. You don't lose that completely because other places you lose that. People don't do it anymore. We do it under a different name, under a different garb, for a different reason, but that practice continues.
Yeah, and I guess for us, we can relate to it the way we want. We can interpret it the way we want, right?
Yeah, we can interpret it however we want, and I mean, Radha is the other thing that is really, really interesting about Radha is amount of poetry that is there around her. There is that. So you have Dharamveer Bharati's Kanupriya, which is such a lovely poem where you know. So the poets have all taken bits and pieces of what they find interesting about Radha. So he talks about the freedom. For him, I'm assuming the freedom in that relationship of her and Krishna was amazing. So when he talks about her, he makes her question Krishna. And in fact, one of those lines which is really beautiful, which I put down here because I thought I'll, tell you about it, is she says, "तुम मेरे कौन हो कनु, मैं तो आज तक नहीं जान पाई." So that you to frame, how do you frame a relationship between the two of them? So the poets were really concerned about that, and they wanted to explore that. Then you have the other kinds. You have the Jayadev's Geet Govind,
Yeah.
and you have Bhanu Singher Padavali by Rabindranath. All of them are looking at this relationship in a spiritual plane, because for them, the love between Krishna and Radha becomes the love for a god. And that's how they look at the two of them, and they all their songs are expressed like that. So it becomes a very they take it to a completely different plane. And because of Jayadev's Geet Govind becoming so popular and so well known across the country at that time, there is this whole category of dancers in Odisha called the Gotipua dancers. So there's young boys who dress up like women, and they sing and dance to Geet Govind, and they become Radha. So they're all Radha, they're Krishna Bhakts. And because the biggest Bhakt of Krishna was Radha, they all become Radha and they dance.
Yeah, Geet Govind, I think, was like it changed everything, right? Captured popular imagination, still going on, it's being staged everywhere, like you're saying.
Yeah,
And it's an erotic poem, right? It talks about the
yeah,
passionate
yeah,
relationship that the two share.
yeah,
Will you talk a little
absolutely.
bit about Geet Govind as well?
You know, so Geet Govind kind of opened up that whole, it didn't allow things. We've repressed a lot of stuff, right? Usually, when you talk about love, you in modern days, we don't talk about desire so much. But
Yeah.
desire is not very distinct from love in the ancient traditions. Be it if we go right up to the time of Kam and Rati, for example, when Krishna decimates Kam, burns him down to crisp, and Rati begs him, that you give me back my husband, because without him, how will I live? Shiv tells Rati that I'm giving him back to you in spirit. But she says, what will I do with spirit? I need form. This love can't exist only in spirit, it needs form. So this idea that desire is being distinct from love is actually very, very modern. So what
Yeah.
Jayadev was doing is that he wanted to see, for him, their love was so much, and especially since then, Krishna and Radha always thought of themselves as one. So the gopis, for example, there's another story which says that, the gopis wanted to test Radha. How close is she to Krishna? So, or they wanted to tease her. So they gave her a cup of really hot milk and said, Krishna has sent it for you, so you drink it up. So she says, Krishna has sent it, theek hai. And she drinks it up and nothing happens to her. But Krishna falls down. The whole hot milk scalds him so badly that he falls down. So, what he does is he takes these little bits and ideas that he plucks out of your, folk culture, and he takes it to the next logical step. Because if two people are so close, clearly their love can't have just been platonic. It wasn't just a love of the birds and the bees and the flowers around them. It had to have passion in it. And the Geet Govind is, it and the language is so beautiful. So, he kind of explores it completely in that. Unfortunately, I don't understand the language so beautifully. So, to be able to understand it fully, but
Yeah.
I just enjoy listening to it. And I remember some years ago, the Banaras Hindu University had done a small dance around it. If I can find the video link, I'll send it to you. Maybe you can put it up in your show
Yeah, yeah,
notes.
absolutely.
It was really nice.
Hmm. And also, what you're saying, the gopis are testing Radha. There's another story where, there's dust in her eye, and then
Ah,
he takes it out. So that's how the gopis know, oh, okay, Radha's special.
yeah. And see, there's another, the thing is that because Radha and Krishna are popular, what happens usually when anything gets popular, everybody wants a part of it. So therefore you have places in UP where everything is Radha is everything. There is the geography around Radha. There is a place where this is where I think somewhere near Barsana only where Yashoda has applied mehendi to Radha's hands. Then there is a place where she bathes before going to meet Krishna. So, because the popularity of the story is so high, that people want to kind of use them in different ways. Use it in the geography, use it in their traditions, use it in their music. even to use it in, so like, for example, there's a story which is usually, there are very few stories where there is Radha, Ganga. They are two independent characters and two completely different traditions otherwise. But there's a story that says that one day Krishna was sitting and Ganga comes to him. And Ganga and Krishna are looking deep into each other's eyes when Radha walks in. And she's very jealous and she's very angry and she storms off and she throws a huge fit and she tells Ganga that if you dare stay on here, I'm going to drink you up. I'm going to empty the world of you. I'm going to drink you up completely. So Ganga is so frightened that she just disappears. She vanishes under the earth. She kind of hides herself, like all our rivers do. They hide under the earth when they are terrified. So she hides herself, but when Ganga hides herself, the world falls apart because there's no water. Everybody is going completely crazy, and they go to the gods. The gods then go to Shiv, saying that do something. You are the one who controls Ganga. And he says, I can't do anything. Go to Krishna. So they go to Krishna, and he says, I can't do anything. Go to Radha because it's her you have to appease. She's the one who's angry, not me. So then they go to Radha and they convince her that Ganga has absolutely no intentions of being Krishna's lover. So please don't do that. Bring her back. So then she agrees, and that's how Ganga, in some iconography, she's shown sitting at Krishna's feet.
Okay.
And Radha will always be by his side.
Radha's made sure of that,
Radha's
basically.
made sure of it.
Yeah, and
How,
you mentioned a
sorry, no,
lot
I
of
just wanted
poets.
to say that when this
Huh.
happens, what it also tells you that two different worshippers, two different cults are coming together. So, the Krishna or the Radha-Krishna worshippers are assimilating the Shaivites into their practices, and they're becoming one. They are not separating them. So you usually do that by combining stories about gods.
Yeah, that's how it evolves, I guess. And you're
Yeah.
mentioning poems, I'm just reading, there's just looking it up. Debotri Dhar, she wrote a
Huh.
short story called Flute called Radha. I
Acha.
think, yeah, yeah. So there also she boldly abandons her home. She's very bold, right, Radha?
Huh.
And then there's
Yeah.
another one, Ramakant Rats Shri Radha. So it's
Huh.
it's beautiful, the lines. I have come out of my house dressed for a night of love. I've left my
Huh.
last breath so far behind I can't go back to it. No? So
Huh.
it's
That's
beautiful.
that's
Yeah.
liberating. Radha is liberating in so many ways because she's a woman, she's an older woman, she's an older woman who's in love with a young boy. She's not married to him, she's married to somebody else. And as Jayadev does, he doesn't mince any words. He says that this is what it is. That let me just find that line. Basically, he's saying that they enjoyed each other. There's no other way
Yeah.
to explain this relationship. They both relished each other, and
Yes.
that kind of relishing, that kind of enjoyment comes only from love, in which you both kind of dissolve into each other.
Right.
And that's the whole idea of that whole bhakti movement takes on.
Mm-hmm.
Even Chaitanya, for example, who's a Krishna Bhakt, he says,
Mm.
I'm a Radha incarnation. That I love him as much as Radha loved him. So I had to be reborn though I am a Chaitanya and I'm born in this form, I was Radha in my previous birth. So my love for him is as much as her love for him.
Yeah. Even
There
as
is
a male,
nobody,
he doesn't relate to Krishna, but to Radha,
yeah,
because that's a devotion. Yeah.
correct. And
Yeah.
there is no, what do you say? There is no, nobody in this universe who can love Krishna as much as Radha does. Because also the other thing, I don't remember this where I read this story, but the story about how some I think Narad tries to come and tell Krishna that who loves you more, among all your wives. And at the end of the day, finally he says you can't mention Radha because she's not the wife. She loves him nevertheless. It's a selfless love. The wife and a wife is expected to love her husband, but she's not expected to. So her love is more selfless,
Yeah. It's unconditional, really.
unconditional.
Yeah.
There is this chapter that I was reading in this book when I was looking at what we would talk about today. Radha and Krishna are like, there's this song which Chaitanya sings, who he says that I'm an incarnation of Radha. He says that Radha and Krishna are one soul in two bodies. They engage in pastimes together, relishing the flavors of love. Now those two have become one in the form of Chaitanya Gosai. So the so he is both Radha and Krishna. That's what he said. That story that Wendy Doniger I was telling you had collected. Huh.
Yeah.
So she was saying that Shiv wanted to take the form of Radha in this birth. But even though Lalita takes the form of Krishna and comes onto this earth, there is at one point when Krishna has to kill Putana Rakshasi when he's a baby. He has
Yeah.
to revert to the form of Kali. So what I was looking at all of these stories is that they always talk about this fluidity, this gender fluidity. Radha can become Krishna, Krishna can become Radha, and this is also what the singers pick on. So the Baul singers, for example, or any kind of wandering minstrels across the country, the songs of Radha and Krishna give them the ability to speak that language. And many of these Baul singers have songs, there are many songs where the whole idea is that they want to turn into Radha. Because only when you turn into Radha can you experience the kind of love for a god that she did. And her love for the god was unconditional, was deep, and that's the space they want to be in. So that's their, those are the kind of songs they have all usually. Like, and then the other thing I was talking about, the Gotipua dancers, they also kind of sing love songs only, but they're young boys who all dress up like Radha. Now, the love of the kind that Radha Krishna had embodied, it was taboo otherwise, right? Now, fact that you've been able to convert something that was a taboo love into something that is so aspirational, where you want to experience that love, says something about the way these traditions have evolved.
Yeah, truly. Also, you're saying, like when devotees like they relate to it, it's also because that yearning, because Krishna leaves, right? She's not with him for life.
Yeah,
He leaves, so there's that constant yearning that she has,
yeah,
which is, I think, like spiritual in nature, that she wants to be one with Krishna, and they don't meet. I think
yeah,
later they meet. There's some story I read where, she's an old woman and he
yeah,
comes back to see her.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, so she questions him. I mean, the only one who really can question Krishna is her. She says, "You're a god, right? You could have stopped the Mahabharata. And why didn't you stop the Great War of the Mahabharata?" Now, ultimately, these are imaginations, right? These are perceptions that people have developed about the two of them and imagined this kind of a language. But the fact is that only a Radha could have asked him this question. There wasn't anybody else in Krishna's life who had that authority on him. A, she was older than him. B, she enjoyed a relationship with him which was out of all other, very different from everything else. So if anybody can question Krishna, even when he is a god, it's only Radha. And so even that, therefore, even say the poets when they sing about her and this yearning that you were talking about, the yearning is interesting because without that yearning, in all our old Sanskrit literature, yearning is part of love. So even if you look at the Ramayana, Ram and Sita spent so many years apart, and there are many passages where Ram's yearning for Sita is gone into with a lot of detail. So the gods are not exempt from the pain of love. That's one of the things that we see in all of these old stories. There is a deep sense of pain that love brings about. True love really brings about. And the Mahabharata has very different ways of showing it, but there too you have a pain and yearning of love
yeah,
that
and
comes up.
you're talking about Sita, so I'll just read out what
Ah,
Tracy Coleman, she's professor of religion at Colorado College in Colorado, USA. She's the editor of Oxford Bibliographies, Hinduism. So I hope to have her on the podcast at some point. So she's written in her essay, this is Radha, lover and beloved of Krishna. She's compared her to Sita. So she's basically said that if Sita epitomizes the ideal woman who is chaste and selflessly devoted to her husband, then who is Radha, the passionate, adulterous lover of Krishna? So part of Sita's and Radha's perfection, therefore, involves their dependence on men, which simultaneously renders them extremely vulnerable, especially in situations of viraha or separation, when their selfless love for their respective beloveds never abates despite intense pain. So it's interesting.
Very interesting, very interesting. And they are very different. I mean, but they're both goddesses.
Yeah, and Sita even gave an Agni Pariksha to prove her chastity. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. No, and the thing is that you have temples in both their names. They're very different goddesses. Like I was listening to something the other day, and they said that many of the ancient civilizations, they didn't have a problem with having goddesses who didn't always tick all the right boxes. Didn't always have to do the right things. So the Egyptians, for example, they had the cult of Isis. And the cult of Isis obviously worshipped Isis. Now, Isis is a very difficult goddess. She does kind of pretty horrendous, violent stuff. But accepting her as a goddess was not difficult for those people because they believed in that power of of her and in her at that particular time. So if you look at it like that, yes, they are different, but they not all, and it's only now that you and I kind of measure them in our modern ideal terms. How do we see them? How do we read them? But if I don't do that for a second and I drop all of these, modern day understandings of structure and frame and go out of it, and I look at these characters and I say that what is it that was culturally so powerful about them that it didn't matter to people that otherwise I have a certain set way of life. Here is somebody who doesn't follow any of the norms that I have set, and yet I worship her. It takes a lot of courage, I think, to do that. And that courage means going out of what is the norm for you. Maybe they were powerful followers and they led them to do that. But whatever it is, it says something about a culture where not everything is made of that same. It's not nothing is a cookie cutter industry. This whole idea of gods all being the same, all looking the same, all doing the same, all being one it's not part of this ancient world. They're pretty different. And Radha, I think, though she appears on the horizon much later than anything else and anybody else. She also carries through that tradition of not having to follow a template.
Yeah, apparently she appeared 1,000 years after the Mahabharata.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. And we
You
feel like
know,
she's
now,
always been there. Huh.
the other thing, Radha, is sometimes some of these stories are oral. Now, for us, we don't know how to go back in time because orality was so different that it may have become sometimes say like what is one line or one sentence in say a passing sentence in a ancient text is then converted into something much larger by somebody else, say maybe 200 years later or 300 years later. Now, are they dipping into their own? Are they just cooking it up? Possible. But in all probability, what they are dipping into is this body of folk or oral literature that they have at their disposal. So we see it also with a lot of the stories of Sita. It comes from the oral culture. Whether you have a Chandrabhuti in Bengal or whoever, it's not that they have completely cooked it out of thin air. It comes to them from the oral. And that's what they say about all our ancient stories, be it the Mahabharata or the Ramayana. They are epics or they are stories that were devised by the sutas, who are the bards and who are the singers of them of these epics. So they always borrowed from the local. They always borrowed from what was around them. They contextualized the stories. These stories also had Brahminical influences, but the beauty was they mixed it all up. It wasn't just like, and it wasn't static. So the Radha story, it may have appeared into our consciousness all those years later, but it probably, there were songs maybe. How does someone pick on it? There would have been some songs about it. There would have been a local story about it, which then kind of gets developed into something much larger.
Yeah, and I think it's Holi. We're talking about Radha. We must talk about Krishna as well. So,
Yeah.
Krishna also, I was just reading, apparently he also came on the scene like just somewhere before the Mahabharata or something like that. And like there were just references. There were images of him with Balram, where Balram was more predominant. So of course I'm no expert. So I'm just saying I've just found these things very, very fascinating. And like you're saying that he may not have appeared on the scene, but the stories would have been around, the folk tales
Yeah.
would have been around. Yeah.
Yeah. So Krishna has, like again, there is this I mean, he's such a complex character, such a complex character. Someday we should talk about him. I mean,
Yeah. Separately.
uh,
Yeah.
we should, because there's this book, there's a very thin book by you called Yugant by Iravati Karve.
Oh, that's my favorite
Oh,
book.
it's just
Yeah. I just
it's
love
so
it.
good.
Yeah.
And the way she breaks things down, and it's so
Yeah.
beautifully and simply. We could just spend hours looking at her, those each of those essays that she has written and going into it. So if you look at Krishna through that kind of a lens, you'll find him an absolutely fascinating character. And yes, Balram and his story is, again, now Balram was his brother, but he doesn't always do what Krishna is asking him to do. In fact, he doesn't fight the war at all. He doesn't fight the Mahabharata war. He goes away saying it's an unjust war. This is not something you should be doing. So, but that doesn't mean that Krishna abandons him and, dissociates himself with him and calls him a traitor and all of that. So, even though Krishna does ask for complete acceptance from his followers, and one of the problems with Duryodhan is that he doesn't accept Krishna as the ultimate God, as the universal God. There is, in even in his acceptance or in his relationship with the people who are around him, there is a lot of give and take. And actually, it's his relationship with Radha is what humanizes him. It kind of makes him somebody who you can relate to. And then of course there are his stories of his childhood, but that falls into a different category. His love with Radha somehow, puts him into a space where he's approachable. He's not somebody who can't be touched.
Yeah. Otherwise, he's this warrior. He's an intellectual giant. He's above towers, above everybody else, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
when you don't, when he has no other recourse, he'll show you his Virat Roop, and you can't
Exactly.
do anything.
But it's only with
Yeah,
Radha that, he has no power.
yeah,
So even Holi, apparently, like that was the thing. He used to go to play Holi with Radha, no? So that's how the
uh,
whole thing is. Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
And actually, Jayadev has fueled our imaginations to an extent that, sometimes for us today it's difficult to separate what he has said about
Yeah.
them from
Hmm.
what we read about them in other texts. Somehow it seems as if he has, it's become a part of their whole narrative. Jayadev is also, as he's just flown into that same place.
Yeah, I
So
think you can't separate him, Geet Govind from Radha. No, that's
you can't, because the thing is, everybody today may be shocked at what he said, but at that time it was just so popular. It was so popular because
it's it's strange.
he's erotic. The verses are erotic and all of that.
It's very strange that we would be shocked today.
Yeah, I agree.
And this was written in
I
ancient
agree.
India, really.
I agree. Yeah, it's surprising. Like I'm saying, this idea that desire is something shameful, is very modern. It wasn't. It was something that you ought to have had, because love is desire. The two of them are the same. There is not much of a difference between the two.
Yeah. And life is messy, no? So everything is messy. It's okay. There are
Yeah,
emotions and so much happening, really.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely,
So maybe
absolutely.
this, which is why, people relate to it also.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the thing is, like I remember the story I was telling you about Radha and Ganga. Now that is, to me, it seems a much later story, because this idea of Radha and Ganga being jealous is something that is a much later introduction into our understanding of women. Because usually this, jealous goddesses is not something that you find in the Indian, mythic dimension, most of them. So they're independent goddesses. You look at Durga, for example. Durga, when she goes to battle, who does she call to help her? Only other goddesses, right? So you
Mm.
have Kali, you have the other goddesses coming to her help. You look at, when we talk about all the songs that we have about Sita, there is this whole concept of all women being sisters in sorrow. So there is an idea of sisterhood, which is, I think it's subliminal, and it maybe we are reading it like that today, but there is an idea of sisterhood that exists in the way Indian goddesses are there. This jealousy bit is more Greek, where the goddesses are jealous of each other, who's more beautiful, who's more powerful. All of that you won't find it in many of our stories. It does creep in, but mostly majority wise, no. They are all independent, and usually, whenever say Sita wants to, take on a Rakshas, or Draupadi wants to take on a Rakshas. So there is a story about how Draupadi fights a demon. When she does that, she has to call upon the inner Kali in herself or the Shakti. They don't appeal to a male god. They have another woman goddess who they can call upon. So this sense of that's why this Radha and Ganga story is interesting because it clearly shows a different mindset coming into being at that time. And you are beginning to see that there are it's more getting more and more patriarchal. It's because, it's the way the men see the women more than the way the women see the women, where that two women will always be jealous, two women will always fight with each other, so that even the mother-in-law, daughter, sister-in-law story, they are, seem to me to be later editions of what the original traditions must have been. Because traditionally, Radha is independent. She doesn't have any need to be jealous of anybody. All of that, comes in much later. And Radha and Krishna's love is like no other. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, and like you said, they've like, completely dissolved into each other. So where is the space for jealousy?
There
They
is
won.
this,
Yeah, very true.
and one feels for the other. One gets hurt, the other gets hurt. It's like it's a two souls in one body, which is what has appealed to the entire bhakti poets, all the time.
Yeah, I'm also just thinking, what happened after Krishna left with the mother-in-law and sister-in-law and the patriarchal setup. She had to deal with all of that.
Yeah. No, the that family was Kali worshippers. So because Krishna was Kali and Radha was worshipping Kali, they immediately kind of accepted everything because at the end of
Yeah,
the day, that's what they worship.
that was smart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, no, that's so interesting. And, like, you actually, when you start reading about Radha, you realize there is so much literature, so much poetry,
Yeah.
so much she stands for, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because otherwise, we actually don't give it a thought. Like, like I said, when I heard Radhe Radhe, I'm like, okay, it just didn't connect till now when I was
Yeah.
thinking about it. That, yeah,
There are lovely kavalis, where I'll send you those links also,
yeah.
where this whole band of kavals and they are singing and they are saying that basically. I just forgot. I listen to it all the time. It's such a lovely song. It basically says that I'm waiting for you and waiting for you, but you seem to have forgotten me. It's basically Radha singing to Krishna when he's away, during the war. And I'm the one that who's been waiting for you. And where are you? You haven't come. It's a love song, but it's usually sung in, sung in that, usual kavali, that banter that you have between them. And it's beautiful. So what Radha, the other thing that I think does is she helps men become uninhibited also. I mean, I don't know how that happens or why that happens. It's difficult to understand, but I think it comes from the fact that she enforces a kind of liberal attitude, to use a modern term, but a more fluid and a more, open attitude towards relationships. And she's an older woman. So men are not inhibited about speaking about their emotions, about or singing about those emotions. So most of the songs that are about Radha are sung by classical music. Many of them have Radha, and they're sung by men.
Yeah, that's interesting because I guess she allows them to be free-spirited, like
Yeah.
Krishna is with her.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, truly.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, anyway, Arundhati, anything else? What does Radha stand for, let's say?
I think she stands for independence. And she followed her desire and she did what she did. Not that she led a very happy life. We don't know because, she would have had to face a lot of difficulties, a lot of tragedies. I'm sure, living in a loveless marriage, for example, and then,
Yeah.
then having a guy, I mean, Krishna, who obviously, everybody wanted a piece of, and then he goes off to the Mahabharata war and she doesn't see him for such a long time. So it wasn't obviously a very easy life, but she's an independent life. And she's an independent spirit. I think, and that I think we shouldn't lose sight of because so many of us, especially, we become so, it's become so easy for us to close our minds to what we truly are. which I think we shouldn't. And I find Radha in that sense quite free-spirited.
Yeah, and I think we're like also tend to lie to ourselves, right? Because you
Yeah.
want to follow a certain path and the right path and things like that. So with her,
Yeah.
she followed her heart, really.
She followed her heart.
Hmm.
And she didn't give any, was no concern of her what society thought about it or said about it. And it helped, obviously. See, now we think it helped because Krishna was a god. But the thing is that if Krishna wasn't a god, suppose we hadn't converted him into a divinity, would it have been any different? Because that relationship would still have existed.
Yeah, and at that time she didn't know that Krishna was a god, right?
Yeah,
He
yeah,
was a
yeah.
child,
And
and then
she
he grew
never
up in front
treated
of
him
her.
like one. She
Hmm.
never treated him like one either,
Yeah.
She treated him like an ordinary human being. And I think that's the other interesting bit that comes out is that because she treats him like an ordinary human being, that also gives a sense of freedom amongst people to accept him. He is approachable. She makes him approachable. She makes him accessible to everyone.
I think that's the thing what you're saying, that she's not putting him in a pedestal, and maybe that's
Hmm.
what frees up a man, right?
Yeah,
Like what you're saying, that
yeah,
for men it's easier to express themselves. They're not on a pedestal, there's no role. There's so much
correct.
fluidity between them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah. Okay. Great, Arundhati. Happy Holi. And
You too have a happy, happy Holi too. And
yeah.
we'll see you again. We'll meet again.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's been great. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks. Thanks, Anuradha. Thank you.
Yeah.